North Otsira, South Otsira, southeasterly 3, increasing 4 or 5,
Fisher,
occasionally
German
6
bite.
later,
West or northwest 3 or 4, increasing 5 or 6.
Southwest Irish Sea,
Showers.
west backing
Good.
southwest 4 or 5, occasionally 6 later in North Irish Sea.
I think I'm allergic to Newcastle. I've been there 4 times, and on each occasion have ended up snuffly, sneezy and rheumy of eye. So I risked strong allergic reaction by driving to Newcastle to take a ferry to Norway. Fortunately, I was late and ushered straight onto the ferry. The dull throb of the engine soon lulled me to sleep, and I passed blissfully unaware across Dogger. For an empty patch of sea, Dogger has an eventful history. 60-odd miles off the coast of Northumberland, the bank is a shallow patch of sea that covers much of this shipping forecast area. It's been the scene of 2 major sea battles, a substantial earthquake, and one of the most remarkable examples of a naval cock-up in maritime history. The first Battle of Dogger Bank was a relatively minor skirmish between the British and the Dutch in 1781, but it was in 1915 that the biggest battle over the bank took place. In December 1914, the German fleet had launched a daredevil raid on the northeast coast, shelling Scarborough, Hartlepool and Whitby. 18 civilians were killed. Buoyed by this, the Germans decided to have another crack a month later. This time, the British were waiting, and a fierce sea battle ensued that resulted in the deaths of 15 British and 954 German mariners. By far the most controversial occurrence in the region, however, was the Dogger Bank incident of 1904. The Russian Baltic fleet had been instructed by the Tsar to sail for Japan, some 18,000 miles away, to participate in what would become the Russo-Japanese War. Signs that this wasn't the brightest of naval flotillas ever to weigh anchor emerged almost immediately when the fleet opened fire on a Swedish trawler, believing it to be a Japanese ship. Meanwhile, a fleet of around 40 British trawlers had left Hull and were working the fishing grounds on and around Dogger Bank. The Russians, under Admiral Rozhdestvensky, came to the obvious conclusion that this was a fleet of Japanese torpedo boats and opened fire accordingly. In 1931, Dogger Bank again hit the headlines as the epicenter of the most violent earthquake ever to hit Britain, measuring 5.5 on the Richter scale. The tremor was felt as far away as Northern Ireland and Germany. At Madame Tussauds, the head of the Dr. Crippen effigy in the Chamber of Horrors fell off, landing at the feet of Arthur Devaney, the Kensal Rise murderer. Headless waxworks and trigger-happy Russian admirals were far from my mind, however, as I snoozed across the North Sea to Stavanger. I was en route to the Danish port of Hanstholm, North Jutland. The tapering of the Fisher region towards Denmark left me few options along the northwest Danish coast, and with a ferry service running from Egersund on the southern tip of Norway to Hanstholm as my only real option. As an experienced traveller, I feel qualified to dish out the following piece of advice. If you're looking for fun and larks that don't involve staggeringly drunk Norwegians, don't go to Egersund ferry terminal in the middle of the night. I had a good hour before the ferry departed at 1:45 a.m, and the waiting room was starting to resemble Valhalla in the aftermath of a particularly popular happy hour. The swing doors would bang open every few seconds, and another bibulous Scandinavian would announce his arrival with a bellow, a belch, or simply by falling flat on his face. In England, we have a few beers and think we're being exotic and adventurous by going to the kebab shop. In Norway, they get tanked up and go to Denmark. On board, the place was heaving with even more drunks. The ferry had begun its journey further up the coast at Bergen, and those passengers had already been making hefty inroads into the ship's booze supplies. A restless, uncomfortable night, disturbed by snoring, bodily emissions, and a young Norwegian couple talking and giggling behind me all night, was ended at what seemed like an ungodly hour by an announcement that we were about to dock at Hanstholm. Hanstholm is, without question, the most boring place in the world. I walked out of the harbour, took the road that wound up the hill, and emerged into nothing. Having expected some kind of throbbing port town, I was startled to see miles and miles of coarse, flat, uninterrupted grassland. Over to the left, sunk among the scrubby dunes, there appeared to be a small shopping centre across the road from what could only be my hotel. And that was it. That appeared to be Hanstholm in its entirety. Until the 1960s, Hanstholm was a small fishing community. As long ago as 1917, someone had had the bright idea of turning it into a modern port with a population of 20,000. But nothing happened for half a century, and the new harbour wasn't completed until 1967. The population barely reached a tenth of its proposed figure, however, despite the proud boast that Hanstholm was home to Denmark's largest fish auction. Apparently, according to local legend, the name Hanstholm is a corruption of Hanskeholm, meaning the islet of the glove. The story goes that a woman once lost a glove here. That's it. That's the story. Would you hold out much hope of fun and larks in a place where a woman losing a glove is an incident so worthy of note they named a town after it? I cursed the arbitrary nature of the shipping forecast map for forcing me to spend a weekend of my life here. Knowing my luck, just yards beyond the imaginary line separating Fisher from German Bight was a groovy town where groovy people were having a really fantastically groovy time. And here I was, in Hanstholm. It's half a century since German Bight replaced Heligoland as the name of the shipping forecast region covering the northern German coast up to Denmark. One thing I didn't realise was that Heligoland is a place. It's an island roughly 30 miles off the northern beaches of Germany, which is now owned by the Germans, but used to be ours. Things were looking good as I flew out of Heathrow one sunny morning, heading for Hamburg. An old school friend of mine, known affectionately as Sleazy Tim, was joining me on this particular leg of the trip. I'd managed to find myself a startlingly cheap travel deal that had landed us in a 5-star hotel. It was handy for the train station and handy for Hamburg port, from whence the hydrofoil to Heligoland, or Helgoland, to give it its proper German name, departed. We arrived at the hotel in jeans, trainers and t-shirts, with holdalls slung over our shoulders. Despite this, an immaculately dressed man in a top hat pushed the revolving door for us, and in we went. "Hello," I said chirpily to a young bespectacled man behind the counter. "Good afternoon, sir," he said, with a welcoming smile that betrayed not the slightest hint of, "What are you doing in my hotel, you oik?" The bathroom was the size of Slovenia. The room itself was so big I had to call Sleazy on his mobile to find out where he was. He was inside the giant walk-in wardrobe, in which we could conceivably have staged golf buggy races. Indeed, so keen to please had our new friend at reception been that if we'd phoned down to request 2 golf buggies, I'm sure he would have sent them up straight away with a complimentary bottle of champagne on the seat. I thought I'd better check with the world's most helpful man the best way to find the Heligoland ferry in the morning. "You'll be travelling to Helgoland?" he said, as if it genuinely was the best idea he'd ever heard in his life, even if it did come from 2 scruffy Englishmen who were making his nice hotel look untidy. "Would you like me to book your tickets now for you?" Sleazy and I looked at each other, very impressed. Oh, why not? It was then I noticed that a computer screen hooked up to the internet had been built into the desk itself. Within seconds, he'd called up the relevant website and tapped in the date, which is when the plan that had been going so ridiculously smoothly was suddenly and consummately blown apart. The ferry was booked out for the entire week. The whole of Germany was clearly decamping to Heligoland. "Is it only Helgoland you are interested in, sir?" he asked. "Yes," I sighed. "Just Heligoland. Sorry, Helgoland." "Have you considered Sylt?" he asked, with genuine sympathy. "Sylt? Sylt? What on earth was Sylt? Some kind of strong German drink, a particular German method of suicide?" "It's another very popular island for Germans, up in the North Frisian Islands. You can take the train from here in Hamburg, it's no problem." "It's an island, and you can get there by train." From beneath the desk he handed me the relevant train timetable, as well as a leaflet about the island of Sylt. This man, this wonderful, immaculately dressed, perfectly mannered man, had saved my bacon. "Nice one, thanks, mate," I said, whipping the documents from his hand and skipping lightly towards the revolving door, which a man with tassels on his shoulders was already setting in motion for the convenience of Sleazy and me. Heligoland. Tja, who'd ever want to go to Heligoland? Sylt. Now there was the place to be. Sylt is an extraordinary place. As well as having a name that sounds like someone accidentally swallowing a peach stone, it is little more than a giant sandbar just before the Danish border. Indeed, the Hindenburg Dam causeway out to this anchor-shaped island is practically adjacent to the border with Denmark. If you look east, that's the Danish coast you can see. Sylt styles itself as the St Tropez of the north, a playground for Germany's filthy rich. If you've got cash to burn in Germany, a holiday home here is practically mandatory. Luminaries from Thomas Mann to Brigitte Bardot have spent time on Sylt, whose climate is believed to be one of the healthiest in northern Europe. As we walked up the street towards the beach, a street packed with day trippers like Sleazy and me, the island's main town, Vesterland, certainly didn't look like the beating heart of German swankery. Souvenir shops sold the usual stuff, and there were amusement arcades and a couple of expensive-looking jewellery shops, but that was about it. We ventured onto the beach, a seemingly endless expanse of fine white sand. The sun was out, but the wind was barrelling along at immense speed, blowing sand in our faces. The beach was crowded with strandkörbe, literally beach baskets. These are two-seater wicker chairs with backs and sides that rise up and over the occupants, sheltering them from the fierce wind. They were all white, with huge numbers painted on them in black, which combined with the sand to make the beach look like some kind of lunar dump for space debris. Huge breakers crashed on the shore with tremendous force, while the strandkörbe occupants looked out to sea, huddled together against the wind. It was so windy that we couldn't hear ourselves think, and given that all the strandkörbe appeared to be occupied by elderly Germans wearing ostentatious jewellery, Sleazy and I decided to head north for List. List is the northernmost community in Germany, right at the tip of Sylt. There's not much to say for it beyond the novel value of being this far north and still in Germany. Again, it was ridiculously windy and there was a distinct nip in the air. We ducked into the Alte Bootshalle bar and ordered Germany's two northernmost beers. The northernmost tape of German sea shanties came out of the country's northernmost speakers, which we took as the northernmost hint in Germany that it was time to go back to Hamburg. As the train passed along the 7-mile Hindenburg Dam over the mudflats, the sun set blood-red on the horizon, while ribbed clouds glowed pink above us. Our faces stung from the constant battering of the salty wind, but that was nothing to how stung we'd feel in the morning when presented with a £44 bill for a breakfast we thought was included. If we'd known, we might have had more than a ham roll and 2 fried eggs.
Malin Hebrides, south or southeast, backing northeast 5 to 7. Showers,
Rockall,
then rain,
southwest,
moderate.
veering west 4 or 5, increasing 6
Northwest
or 7.
Fitzroy, variable 3 or 4, mainly fair, good.